Shouldn't be.
We are live.
3 years old.
Yes, but it should be. Wait. It should be another way of camera.
Okay.
Wait.
No worries. Here is your
Yes.
camera.
Yes.
You use the back camera.
Yeah. Exactly. Thanks. Okay.
Dimension where they interact.
I believe I would say live, but maybe one.
No, it's yeah.
1 second.
A little bit
Thanks.
easier.
Okay. Perfect.
Like now we can take her places, and it's not such a problem.
Okay.
I mean, it's not so
Here.
like right and there's money. Yeah. I just will, and since we're in the US embassy, like, I don't care. It's
I will check it.
for the speak.
Yes. So that's the free Wi-Fi, and the password is /CRI Wi-Fi /. Everything small letters, only Wi-Fi capital.
When we're in Italy,
We are actually live on.
when we're in Italy, like if we're at a restaurant, there's kids running everywhere and no one minds. I mean, it's depending on the restaurant, right? If you go for pizza. Sure, yeah. Okay, so
Hi, so we're going to start. My name is Dula Mišević. I'm a Director of Research Affairs here at the Center for Research and Interdisciplinarity, CRI, in Paris. So some of you are local, some of you are maybe here for the first time, and some of you are maybe looking through the webcast. So we're very happy to have Saga with us today, and I'm very excited to hear about all the fantastic things that they've been doing. So I've been asked just to briefly introduce the place we are at. So CRI has existed informally and formally for about 15 years now. It started as a small group of researchers primarily in biology, in microbiology, evolution, who were interested in doing science differently, and differently in a sense of using new methods, but also differently by doing research with the students and doing teaching through research. So they started several different educational programs, and now we are in this new building in the center of Paris with about 8,000 square meters of space, including residential housing, with about 300 students in undergraduate, 2 and soon 3 master programs and a PhD program. So it became a very big place, but the spirit is still frugal. The spirit is still how to do things that we can scale up. Primarily, our domains are interdisciplinary life sciences, education sciences, and digital technologies. We also have researchers here as of a couple of years ago, some of whom you'll see introducing speakers later, who are researching in these domains and working together with students. So again, it's a pleasure to see everybody here, and I'll ask Anshu, one of our research fellows, to continue.
So thanks a lot, Dula. It was a very nice introduction to this very special place. I'm Anshu. I'm a long-term fellow here. And what we did as a research community is to show our alignment with gender equality in science. And for that, what we have done is we have created this video. We believe in equality, and the members of the CRI community are the people you will see here. And it shows you how diverse are we in terms of the nationalities as well as the work we do. But despite all that, unity in diversity. And here is the video. Yeah, I just stopped the video. Just a second. It's on, right? Yeah, it's on. We tested it.
It's off, right?
I don't understand why.
So we can switch on the you don't have this. Maybe I can put the video for you.
I don't understand why. No, it's full. The volume is full. It should play, but it's not playing. Okay, so we'll actually go back to our schedule and we'll play this video after the talks are over to see why it's not working. And in the meantime, we would like to invite Kara, who is a research postdoc at Sorbonne University and works in environmental sciences. She's also the coordinator for the 500 Women Scientists program, the Paris chapter. And with that, we'll hand over the mic to Kara.
Okay, thanks. So hi everybody, thanks for coming. Just a quick introduction to the event. I saw a presentation of the Saga project earlier, what was it, November, I think. Anathea invited me to UNESCO to see the report, basically, of the Saga project, and I thought it was really interesting, and I basically wanted to share your information with other people, because I felt like I'm in the room listening, but this information is really relevant to a lot of people, and it should be disseminated more widely. So I asked her to speak, and Alessandro also, who I'll introduce right now. So Alessandro Bello is a project officer at the UNESCO for the global project STEM and Gender Advancement, Saga, this project we're talking about today. He holds a bachelor degree in development and international studies and 3 master's degrees in governance and public policy, political science, and international relations. He's been working at UNESCO since 2011, both in the field and headquarters. He's worked as a consultant for the Science Policy and Capacity Building Program at UNESCO Montevideo office and for the Science Policy and Partnerships section in Paris. Since 2015, he is a project officer for the Saga project. Before joining UNESCO, he worked for the Italian Embassy in Honduras, and he's published numerous papers related to science, technology, and innovation policy, and on women in science. Anathea Brooks has worked for the UN's International Fund for Agricultural Development in Rome, for UNESCO in Paris, and most recently for the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs to support the UN Secretary General's Special Envoy for the Ocean. She's taught at universities in Milan, at Columbia University in New York, University of Maryland. She was the assistant director of 2 interdisciplinary consortia between universities, NGOs, and the private sector at Columbia on Biodiversity Conservation and at Maryland on Earth System Science based at NASA. She began her studies in zoology at UC Berkeley and received a master's in sustainable development and conservation biology from University of Maryland, College Park. At UNESCO, she was a focal point for gender equality for the natural sciences sector from 2007 to 2017, during which time she helped create the Saga project. She also worked on gender and climate change, collaborating with other UN organizations, including the UNFCCC, NGOs, and with national governments to raise awareness on how climate change affects men and women differently in the developing world, and also how to empower women to participate in climate science and policy. So with that, I'll hand over the mic to Alessandro.
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you. I would like to thank CRE and the 500 Women Scientists to organize and inviting us to be here. It's a very pleasure to stay here with you. And I would like to say, do you have your phone with you? Because this is a conference, so you should use them. At least this time. We're going to use quite a few times, let's say. Now, before, thank you for the introduction of the STEM and Gender Advancement Project. Let me tell you about the outline of this presentation. At the beginning, we decided with Anathea to give you a bit of the overview of what is the actual situation of women in science right now. and then to talk more about the Saga project. And Anathia, my colleague, will give you more details on that. And then it will be me again giving you more information about the impact of the implementation of the Saga project. So I have a question for you. So I think that, do you know this picture, right? And the first thing that came to your mind is, wow, there are 17 Nobel Prizes out of 25 over in that picture. Is that right? Can you notice another thing?
Yeah, just one more.
Yeah, only a few people have mustaches, right? I know. Yeah, we only have one woman. And I mean, I think that everybody knows who that woman is. Yeah, say it aloud. It's Marie Curie. Yeah, indeed. That was back in the fourth Solvay conference in the 1927. But what is the current situation? And really, this is a question for you. What is the current situation? I would like to know from you. So please go to this website, www.menti.com, and digit this code, 7644291. Oh, that's a very good question.
Dash, CRI, small letters, okay. And then capital letters, Wi-Fi, WIFI, and then dash, small.
It's here, no?
Close this thing. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
You just put it to this,
Yep.
and now you use.
And then I can go back to one more time. No, I want to go to the Google one. Okay. So here are several options that you can choose. You will see these already in your phone. Is the situation, we only have 15% of the world's researchers are women, around 30% of the world's researchers are women, between 45 and 55, or more than 60. Yeah, for the Wi-Fi. Without using Google, please.
Your question, the answer is yes.
Yeah. Yeah, researchers in general. I mean. How many people do we have? 3.
Somebody changed their mind.
Have you all voted? Not yet. Two, 4, 6, 8, 10. This is cool. So 20, I think that it's enough to start talking. Meanwhile, you can keep voting, but I think that we already have an idea. You are very pessimistic, no? Very few of you think that, well, by the way, first of all, we consider parity when it's between 45 and 55%. So we cannot consider parity when we reach exactly the 50%. So few of you think that the situation is very positive, that more than 60% of the women researchers are women, or that we reached parity. And a few of you think that the situation is very bad, that we only have 15% of the world's researchers are women. Well, actually, though, most of you have said it. Sorry. Because the actual situation is that we do have the 28.8% of world researchers are women, and I would like to show you numbers, but there I go. Okay, so this is the music to introduction, this graph. So as you can see, I mean, there were a few. Considering the situation as it was back in that photo that we saw in that photo, it's slightly better, but it's only 1/3 of the researchers are women. And this is the world average. But as you can see, there are the difference. In each region, there are many differences. I mean, in the Arab states, we only have less than 40% of researchers are women, but in other countries like in East Asia and the Pacific, only 23% of researchers are women. And in South and West Asia, it's even worse, the situation, less than 20%. The only two regions that have reached parity are Central Asia and Latin America and the Caribbean. Again, when we refer at parity, we are talking just about numbers. We are not talking about equality, to have the same right, the same possibility, okay? We are just talking about numbers here. And we can clearly see that only two regions, that there is a lot to be done. This is an interesting map that can really show you the situation, but you already saw that. You can see that Latin America, it's quite the purple, it's a very dark, let's say, and in Central Asia too. And we have a few countries missing. We do not have all the data, of course. But, so, what is in reality, that we do not have in global average, the problem starts during the school to work transition. Before that, we do not have, we have reached parity in the bachelor's, we have reached parity in the master. We start having a few problems when we go up to the doctoral or equivalent level, and we do have lots of problems when we talk about researchers. But these, again, are just an average. We have to consider that 1/3 of the country has already reached parity. So, and when we went to this country to implement the Saga project, they said, look, but in our country, 54% of researchers are women, so we do not have any problem. But in that case, you need to scratch a bit the surface. And you will see that higher levels, this arrow will go down, and this one will go up. We will have, and this is what we have found in most of the countries, we will have what we call the vertical segregation. As soon as you go up in the career, you will have fewer women. And this, it's evident, even the Nobel Prizes, only 3% of the scientific Nobel Prizes have been awarded to women. So there's still a lot of things to be done. And when we look at STEM, because that was sciences in general, but when we look at STEM, we also see what it's called the horizontal segregation, meaning that here the problem is it starts even when we talk about education, because only 35% of all students enrolled in STEM related fields of studies are women. And here there is another interesting thing that you can grab from this map. We do not have a lot of data. We're missing data. So we already saw three problems. There is a vertical segregation. Women do not reach higher level of research, even in those countries where they have reached parity at the first level, let's say. We have a horizontal segregation, and we have missing data. And I have another question for you. So why so few? Why we do not have why we haven't reached parity yet? Why we do not have gender equality in general? And again, you can, but this time, the code is the same. Let me know if you can see this, this question. Otherwise, I have to change Can you see it? Okay. Let's try to be synthetic as possible. Let's try to just put one word. Okay. I know that it's a difficult task, but let's try. Ta-da-da-dum. I like the yes. Okay. Okay. Good, good. So it is very interesting for us too. As you can see, there is not just one answer. There are several things. This is a complex problem. This is a complex issue. And to do that, to overcome all these difficulties, we need to have an holistic approach. And this is what we have done to try with the Saga project. And my colleague later, Anathea, will talk you about this actually takes several things like the stereotypes that are in the societies, the problem, the absence of role model when in the career, but also there are other problems that hiring bias again in the career. So as you can see, there are several things that we need to take into consideration. We need a holistic approach to overcome, to reach parity. And in Saga, we have gone through this, and you will see it later. Keep in mind all your answers, please. So we have seen that the situation it was worse at the beginning. It's still we are still having a few problems. Let's say that the solution is complex, and we are going to address that later. But why do we need to reach gender equality? Why do we need that? Yeah, somebody wants to say why?
You cannot develop without the other house's equal contribution.
Okay.
That I would say.
Good, good.
You're losing potential of half of the population.
Very good.
Children are mostly raised by females, so if the society in general has to have a more broad opinion, it's important that they are on board.
Yep, perfect. I mean, I think that there are, for us, what is important is, I think that you are quite familiar with this, no? What we call the SDG, the Sustainable Development Goals. Well, first of all, we think that we cannot achieve not even one of the 17 targets, SDGs, without achieving gender equality. And this is because, first of all, it's a fundamental human rights. I don't know if you are aware, with last year we celebrated the 17th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Well, gender equality and access to sciences are human rights. So, first of all, we have the human right-based argument. But also sustainable development requires more science and more scientists. As some of you were already saying, we cannot afford this without not including half of the population. So we need more science, and so that's why we need more women scientists too. And the sustainable development also requires better science, and women contribute with their particular view to science. And several papers already shown that when there is a parity, we achieved more results. And we achieved better science. And these are just an example of other researchers, of other papers that are showing the benefits of inclusiveness research. In 2012, a Credit Suisse studies of 2,360 companies globally found that those with at least one woman on the board outperformed companies without any female board members by 26% over 6 years. Another study that looked at the gender composition of management teams in Standard & Poor 1,500 companies found that women in top management positions were associated with an increase of 42 million in firm value. And there are several also papers, researchers showing the importance of diversity. They show that, for instance, having people from different background, not necessarily from a different gender, but even from a different background, increase the number of citations that those papers get. And there is this interesting study too, that I don't know if you are familiar with the EIGE, it's the European Institute for Gender Equality, and they showed that if we close the gender gap in STEM education, we will increase our GDP per capita from the 3%, the rapid progress, to the 2%. So that means 640 billions. That's if you don't like the gender, the human right-based reasons. If you don't like that the sustainable development needs more science and therefore we need more women scientists. If you don't like the fact that better science it needs to include more women, we have the economic. Sorry, I've destroyed that. But that's don't worry, because now this is. I will pass the floor. I will give the floor to my colleague Anathia that is going to tell you more about the Saga project. This was just to tell you a bit more about why we came up with the Saga project and what is the current situation.
Can you put me on the next slide?
In Europe, if No. It's just two estimations. One is the slow progress, and the other, they couldn't say that they had to say the range. Let's say the minimum is that the GDP per capita is going to increase of 2%, and the maximum 3.4. Okay. I'll be back later.
Yeah. Well, so now we have a picture of what the situation of women in science was and the situation for those of us who were trying to figure out what to do about it. Before Saga, women were underrepresented in science, technology, and innovation, STI, and this represented a loss of important talent. There was really no standardized methodology on how we could have evidence-informed policy making that includes the very important aspect of monitoring policies and those instruments that are created in order to enforce policies. There was so much anecdotal evidence about this, but no reliable information on what the specific drivers and barriers to careers in science and engineering were. And if without that, I, as a gender focal point at UNESCO, really didn't know what are the best kinds of things that UNESCO could do to help countries who want to address this problem to go forward. What were the kinds of programs that we should be putting out there? And in general, there's a lack of sex disaggregated data. We've seen for the SDGs that that's considered to be a really important thing. And so that helped Saga to get placed into that argument. And so back several years ago, we wrote a proposal to try and answer these questions that turned into the name Saga, STEM and Gender Advancement. And we're very grateful to Sweden through the Swedish International Development Cooperation Agency, which funded this project for 3 years. And it finished in November when Kara saw our final meeting about it. So what Saga tried to do was to help reduce the gender gap in STI in all levels of education and in research by doing several things all at the same time. First, and really took a lot of intellectual work to do it, was to come up with a methodology and tools that we could use so that we could go to countries and help them build capacity in workshops, teach them how to find the data they do have, how to collect it, and how to coordinate all their policies in a way where they could really see where the gaps are, and at the same time in order to get pilot countries to want to work with us to test what we were creating, we did a lot of media information, went to conferences to talk about what the Saga project aimed to do at the very beginning. So that was advocacy for the mere fact of women in science being an important topic. So the overall way that the project was working is we were looking both at policies for gender equality in STI and at data measurement of the actual situation in a country in terms of STEM. And we did that by 3 different main things: reinforcing capacity, using the tools that we created, and fundamentally the very first part was the creation of what we call the STI goal, the Saga Science, Technology, and Innovation Gender Objectives List. Project started with 3 people thinking about this, and we hired Ali and a statistical assistant, but we felt like we needed to get advice from the real experts in the world. So we created an advisory committee with members from the European Union who work on she figures, or from UN Women or the American Association for Advancement of Science, amongst others. And they have been a fantastic resource for us. And through the outreach we had done, a lot of other institutions wanted to use our methodologies. So just a few examples, we've been collecting sex disaggregated data using our tools with the World Council of Civil Engineers, the Global Research Council's Gender Working Group, Columbus Association, the Inter-American Development Bank, which focused on innovation, which as you'll see is one of our gender objectives, the International School for Advanced Studies, CISA, in Trieste, and a project called the Gender Gap in Science. This is a project funded by the created last year, the International Science Council. Its official title is A Global Approach to the Gender Gap in Mathematical, Computing, and Natural Sciences, How to Measure It, How to Reduce It. It's led by 2 scientific unions, the International Mathematical Union and the International Union for Pure and Applied Physics, and it aims to produce sound data to support the choices of interventions that can be made by either the ISC or member unions that would actually work. So that's a good complement to Saga, which was working at the level of national governments. Saga contributes to this project in 2 out of 3 of their main tasks, as they call them, and you could participate in the first task if you're interested. It was a global survey of all these kinds of scientists. In the first, up to the end of 2018, 32,000 people have taken the survey. It's available in 7 languages at the website that's on the screen now, which you can find later if you are interested. And it will be open until the end of June this year, but this year's input might not make it into the data analysis since that has already begun. The second task is looking at publication patterns and how to get more accuracy on the numbers of men versus women if there's only initials, or if it's languages that you might not know. How do you guess if the name is male or female? And the last one is to put an online database of the best practices that can help to increase girls' interest in STEM education and help women continue in their careers. So now we'll turn back to Saga. Originally, we thought our goal would be to write a book, methodology guidelines, so that anybody anywhere who wanted to work on this could do it the best way possible. Instead, what we decided to do, because of all the interest we were getting so early before we could possibly write, you can't write until you finish the project, we made working papers as soon as we finished one little compartment so that things could get out there to the public as soon as possible. And the first working paper is the list of what we call the STI goal, which we've mentioned already. You can see the 7 names there. It's a very short publication and it's bilingual. So it has 7 goals and then it has objectives, and then it has sub-objectives, but the total of those is still less than 50 things. And you saw your answers on what the problems are. We must have read 1,000 research papers and had discussions for an entire year in order to synthesize all those problems into the smallest number of usable different types of categories. And people will always say you forgot something and want to make it longer, but the longer you make it, the more difficult it is to use. Just as one example, the STI Gender Objective 2 is engage girls and young women in STEM primary and secondary education, as well as technical and vocational education and training. In our final publication, we used this image, which came originally from a book done by colleagues in the education sector of UNESCO, called a book they worked on called Cracking the Code. And our intervention points go from the student to their family and their friends, to their school and the environment at school, to the broader society. And we collected from our pilot countries examples that they had done of how you can address this gender objective. And it includes things like revising your textbooks, get rid of gender stereotypes in them, for example, support and develop female teachers so that they're comfortable teaching science, enable girls to meet a real women scientist so they have an inspiration, give them fellowships or awards of some kind, also to encourage them to continue all the way through, and then things to encourage educators to learn more about research-based teaching, hands-on teaching, because that tends to be more interesting to girls. And I forgot to say that our focus originally was for developing countries, but we didn't realize that this was going to end up being just as interesting to developed countries. Our second working paper is called our toolkit. It's where we give all the terminology, all the classifications, so that every country that does this can understand the words in the same way. Alessandro mentioned parity, which is about numbers. That's not the same as equity, the things you do to give everyone a push so that you're at the same level. And that's not the same as equality. But if you get your words mixed up, you can't compare the results from different countries. The toolkit, of course, has tools. These are aimed to help the policymakers to design future policies and look at the policies they do have. So there's a policy matrix, which I'll show you in a minute, a matrix for indicators, and footprints, and Alessandro will show you some footprints in the results section. And various sources of where, if you don't know where to find the data about who is where are the girls and women in your country, we point them to the likely sources of where they can get data. One thing that we had to look at in the very beginning was, what is the STEM population? STEM, in case you don't, science, technology, engineering, mathematics. Well, you might think it's everybody who has an education in STEM and a job in STEM. But there are actually people who have an education in STEM and then don't use it in a science job. Think of mathematicians who work in high finance. Or you might be in the science and engineering workforce but not have studied that at university. You could be the administrator who handles all the grant funding, or you could be a lab tech who learned on the job and got so good at it, maybe you'll go back to school and get a STEM education. So that we wanted to be able to capture all those different populations in one thing. And the next two slides are just to give you an example of what the policy matrix looks like. It just helps the country to find all its policies. It probably never looked at them all together in this way. See which ministry or which institution they're at, and what kind of thing it is. We have a whole list that's in a footnote, so it's not on the slide, how it links to the STI gender objectives, who it's trying to help, how much money there is, which level of government it is, how it links to the SDGs. So it basically tells you everything about the policy that you have, and then about all the policies that you have altogether. So this is the second half of the graph. Working paper 3, and there's 5, so I'm half done, is a model questionnaire about the policies, and it's where you would want to use that matrix after you've collected all the information. And it's meant for national institutions, agencies, and universities, but you could use it elsewhere, and in fact it is being used elsewhere. That helps you to detect the gaps that you have in your policies and come up with an agenda for filling them. The fourth working paper is the survey of the drivers and barriers to careers in science and education, and this is the one that might be something you would consider doing here, should you so be interested. It tries to identify everything through a 40-page long survey. We don't expect any institution to want to use all 40 pages, all those questions, but you pick and choose what is useful in your specific circumstance. They're all organized around the STI gender objectives, and it helps you to figure out who should our population be, how do we reach those people, how do we validate the data, how do we work with it and present the results so we can understand all the stuff that we're going to get back. And there's a lot of questions in there on things like harassment and on work-life balance and childcare. The final working paper, Telling Saga, is the culmination of the project that shows what our results were in our pilot countries. It starts, though, with background information, including what UNESCO has done over time and what it's continuing to do, historical background of women in science going back to the classical period. Of course, it's very brief. And you saw the current situation. We break that out by region and give a lot more detail. And it has information on improving gender-relevant data, especially for the SDGs, improving STI policies and their measurement, a summary of trends that we saw from the results we got, the outcomes organized by the different STI gender objectives, and contributions from each pilot country and each of our partners with case studies. And now I switch back to Ali, who's going to talk about the pilots we had all around the world.
Thank you, Anathia. So, I think that one important thing is what we were saying at the beginning and what Anathia already mentioned. Hey. That we really need to have this holistic approach, and we have implemented it in several countries. We cannot reduce the gender gap in STI if we do not work towards changing social norms and stereotypes towards women in STEM. We cannot reduce the gender gap if we not engage more girls and young women since primary and secondary education in STEM or at higher education. And we need also to push them during the career progression. We need to eliminate all the barriers that exist. But we need also to change, to address the gender dimension to the research content and practice, to change the policy making to taking into account the gender equality, and to take into account even in the innovation part. Where we have implemented this project? Well, as you can see from this map, what we have tried to do during the first part of the project, that was like a piloting phase, we have tried to get at least one country per region. We had Argentina and Uruguay from Latin America, Haiti and Jamaica from the Caribbean, Quebec, Canada, the province of Quebec from the north, Europe, let's say, because we consider Europe and North America as one region at UNESCO, and then countries in Africa like Gambia and Thailand in Asian Pacific. Then other countries, after we have implemented it, have come to us asking for implementing the project. So we decided to organize sub-regional workshops when we were gathering several different countries. We have done one for West African countries, one for the Arab states. Next week, I'm going to India for a sub-regional workshop for India, Bhutan, Nepal, and other countries, and there will be one for SADC countries. This is just some of the pictures we have taken during the workshops, but what we have achieved so far, because we have seen the methodology. We have seen that we are working with policymakers, but we are working also with institutions. And what we have achieved so far? Well, yeah, we have trained 350 expert and policymakers from 100 national institutions. But what is more important, we have working together for in the 9 countries, apart from the sub-regional workshop, 162 institutions. When we go in one country, we identify with them the key stakeholders that are working on science, technology, innovation, and on gender, and we make them working together. Because as I said, this is a complex problem. We need to have all the key institutions on board if we want to achieve things. So for us, this was the real success of the project. And I'm going to share you some of the impact in policies. But it was not thanks to just to the methodology, but to the work of all these people, of all these institutions. We have been collaborating, as Anathea already showed, with almost 20 national institutions, international institutions, from OECD to UN Women, from Europe to Africa to Asia. So because we also need, we want to avoid overlapping. We think that we can work better if we work together, and we can have a better and deeper impact only if we work together. So other institutions were already working on the topic. We decided to collaborate with all of them. We have also produced 7 country reports on the status of women in science and on gaps on the policy mix that are available on our webpage. The methodology itself was also downloaded more than 10,000 times. But there is something else that I would like to share with you. This is just a visual. We call it the STI Gender Objectives Footprint. We have gone through these 7 areas that we have identified in order to have an holistic approach. And we have checked in each country what they are actually doing. How is the situation? And this is quite interesting because what it came out is that, as you can almost see from this is the number of, it's a numerical thing, it's the number of policies and instruments that each country is implementing towards the severe area that we have identified. But one thing is interesting. The STI number 1 is the one about changing social norms and stereotypes. In each country where we have worked, they have said there is not one thing that is more important than changing social norms and stereotypes, especially in our country. This is important, this is very important, this is very important. But as you can see, only a few countries are really doing something. So this is useful to show them, look, yes, you are saying that it's important, but you are not doing anything. There is a huge gap there. It changed in each country. Yes, Quebec, for instance, that decided, because this was, there are footprints that were gave us by the national teams that are working. And they have elaborated this. That's why you can see that the Quebec one, it's different from the other one, because they were considering, if you do the math, doesn't give you 100% if that is your question, because they were saying no, because we have to consider that 80% of the instruments are focused on the STI goal 1, on changing social norms and stereotypes, but also they can be working towards, for instance, the STI goal number 3, that it's engaging more women and girls in the career, in the higher education. So another thing is that it's interesting that only a few countries say that still primary engaging more girls and young women in primary and secondary education was a priority. And the two most important, or at least where they were implementing more instrument and policies, were the STI goal number 3, that it's higher education, and the STI goal number 5, that it's career progression. They really think that they are doing something. But I would like to, if you could see, and you can go to the working paper 5, the one that Anathea was telling you about, in each of the countries you will have the numbers of women scientists, and you will see that scissor diagram that we have seen before. So they are doing things, but they are not working with a holistic approach. Another important, interesting fact is that the STI goal number 5 is the one that what we call the STI goal number 5. It's the one on the including the gender dimension into the research practice and agenda. And this is something, it's a new concept. And as you can see, only a few countries are working on it. If we do have more time later, I don't think so, but maybe I would like to point something out about this STI goal. Everybody pointed out that there is more to be done on the policy side, that they are not doing a lot, and also that we need to work towards innovation. So this is, I'm showing this to you just to point out, first of all, that they are working, but to show you where the gaps are, and the difference between what they say and what they are doing. So with the implementation of the Saga project, we actually managed to change policies, to change laws. For instance, in Gambia, there is a new law on the new law on STI and science technology innovation now includes the gender equality component. And there are other policies that have been issued by Quebec, by Argentina, by Uruguay, that are now taking into consideration to their STI policies gender equality, something that they weren't doing it before. So we are really having an impact, not just in the numbers, policymaker trained, but really in changing the policies. We, thanks to the implementation, and again, thanks to the work of all the people in the institution that were involved, now there is a new national plan for STI and the new specific program focused on women in STI in Argentina. The Ministry of Higher Education Research, Science and Technology in Gambia created a gender unit. A specific position unit was created for equality, diversity, and inclusion was created in Quebec. And these are other policies where gender equality was included after they collaborated with the Saga. But we also had an impact at the global level. I don't know if you are familiar with the recommendation on scientific researchers. Last year was we had one that was 1974, is that correct? And last year we issued a new one, let's say, after a long process of discussions. And this recommendation includes now parts of gender equality that was using the STI goal, the 7 areas that we have seen before, but also the declaration of the World Science Forum included the importance of having STI policy and instruments and collecting sex disaggregated data. While we were working in these countries, we have collected several instruments and policies, and we have developed a database that it's online. You can go use it. It's available on the Saga webpage, and there is a direct link. This is a beta version. We are working on a better one. This is a beta one, okay? So I don't like either. If that's what you're thinking, that you don't like that. I don't like either, so it's just a beta version. But it's useful because there you can find several instruments and policies implemented by countries focused on gender equality in STI, especially in these 7 areas that we have identified. This is just what you can get from there. So, a few more things. First of all, from this QR, thank you for your attention. I'm sorry if we were a bit, now we have half an hour for discussion. This is a QR code where you can get all the Saga tools. And I don't know if we do have time, but I would like to have your impression about what do you think that is more important for you. So if you go again to our dear friend at www.menti.com and use the same code, and let me just, okay, it shouldn't be this one. You have 100 points to distribute among these 7 areas, and we would like to know what for you is more important. So use the code, 100 points. You can say, for instance, 10 for changing social norms and stereotypes, 50 primary and secondary education, 30 to higher education, and 0 to the others. No, there was not a suggestion. It was just an example, of course. Can you all see these images in your phone? Yeah? Maybe we are influencing the vote, showing the results, no? Yeah, but I think that I think that meanwhile, while you are voting, and then we can all discuss this, but we can open the floor to questions meanwhile.
Yeah, exactly.
No?
Yeah, let's do this and then.
Because I think.
Yes. So thank you again for presentation.
Thank you. I already see one question here. Can you? Oh.
Yeah.
It's on.
My question may be a bit of a provocation, but do we see this as a victory?
No, no, we were pointing that out because we really think, sorry if I jump in on this question. One of the, let me say something before that. I've been involved in conferences related to women in science for a long time. And in each conference, whenever I go, I see, like the stage today, most of the people attending are women. It's a victory. No, it's not a victory. I think that, first of all, it's because institutions, in the case of the conferences, but even in the case when we work with policy makers, they do not understand that gender equality is not a women issue. Gender equality is for the society. It's for the benefit of the society. And since they see gender equality, they think that it's just a women issue. And this, we can see this in the 75%. It's not a victory at all. And it's a, I mean, it's not a provocation. It's, thank you for pointing that out. But it's the same thing that happens in the conferences. Always. When institutions see that, or governments, institutions, or university, when they see that it's something it's related to gender equality, they send women. Sorry, I don't know if you want to add.
Nothing to add, but the funny thing about Saga was there were 3 men and 2 women on the project. And we didn't plan it that way. We looked at resumes and we hired the best people we could find. And Ali was definitely the best we could find for the particular job that he has. Yes.
Hi, I'm a cultural anthropologist, and I also do training as a consultant on gender issues. So thank you. I'm really looking forward to using the different toolkits. I have one comment and one question. The first one is in the first graph that you showed about the world and how many women researchers there are. One of the regions was Arab states, and I don't think it's correct in it this way because Arab is an ethnicity. So what I've heard is MENA, Middle Eastern.
Yeah.
Is this what you were referring to?
No, we're
It's-
following since it was a UNESCO project, UNESCO has a codified breakout of world geographic regions for our member states' governance. So for us, it's pretty much equivalent to MENA. When I was at EFAD, we used MENA.
That's why even when I said that Canada, I said for us it's North America and Eastern Europe.
And
And
Europe.
Western Europe.
Yeah.
So
They actually include more countries than the Arab states because in MENA you have all the most of Africa, which is not actually included in the data that you have.
Well, our data for Africa doesn't include the northernmost countries. And for example, everything on the peninsula would be in the Arab states, but Iraq is not. That's Central Asia. And
Sudan is Arab state.
yeah.
Yeah.
And one reason that we didn't work in Europe was because we didn't think there would be any need in Europe because European Union, and she figures they're doing pretty much the same kind of thing and they're working on policies in Europe. We didn't intend to work in North America either, but Canada came to us when they heard us give a talk in Uruguay about the project. They were there at the talk and they were just thrilled. So they were going to do this kind of work anyway. They just used our tools to do what they were planning to do. Did you have a question now?
Yes. Second is regarding the different arguments. Why do we need more women? It's interesting to see that depending on the different regions, the argument will speak most. So I did a training in Mexico with the AMEXI, the cooperation agency, and for them it's a human right. That was why we needed to do it. And then in France, I did the training with the AFD, and the economic argument was what they use more. But as an anthropologist, I want to ask everyone, like, what if it didn't bring $1 single more to hire women? Shouldn't we do it anyway?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, that's why we pointed out the first 3. Absolutely.
Okay. Is there a way to capture questions that the people listening on to the webinar?
Yeah, I mean, there is no question live
Okay.
for now. I mean, there is just comments that I agree with gender.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, so we will.
Where's the mic? We need somebody to. Oh, okay.
Short question. I was very curious to know why math was separated from science and technology. Is there any reason for that? Because where you mentioned STEM, you see that math is separated from engineering, technology, and science.
Okay. Well, that has to do with the way in the data that's collected by the United Nations and by the UNESCO Institute of Statistics, the research and development, R&D data, is collected for science and technology. So that's where the S&T comes from. We talk about policies, STI, science, technology, and innovation, And it's only in the education area that the STEM acronym is used. So we were trying to follow the acronyms that are used by the major data collection agencies, but it doesn't mean we weren't looking at jobs in mathematics per se. There should be somebody who walks the mic around. I guess it's hard because the rows are so narrow.
So you basically advise the policymakers regarding the saga, like gender equality.
We give them the tools and they do the work. They're the ones who know what they think. Well, they think they know what the problem is, but the tools show them that maybe the problem could be somewhere different than what they thought. But that when they see where the problems are, it's up to them to decide if they're going to attempt to solve them or not. But if they are, then here's tools to do it. But we don't tell them what's right.
And I would like to add something on that. On top of that, all the tools can be adapted because it's not, there is nothing, there wasn't one slide, there is no one size formula that fits for everybody. So in each country, each country it's different. So they need to tailor the tools based on their needs, but based also on the national priorities and what's going on in the country. It's a quite.
Advising policymakers alone is not enough, at least in where I come from.
Let's say that the country where we are implementing the projects, they ask for the implementation of it. So they have, not every single country is asking for implementing the project.
Yeah, the pilot countries had to be ones where the delegation at UNESCO said, we're interested in that project, can you do it in our country? Because we sort of gave a presentation to all the member states and then some came up to us. And then after some time had gone by and countries saw how good the results were in the first countries, then more and more countries have been asking for it. And by the time the tools are really tested through phase 2, then, they're already available online, but at that point, any country that's interested will just be able to do it without our training. But at the same time, institutions, a university somewhere, a town or a state-level government could also do this on their own, but it's just that we wouldn't be sitting there to do it with them. And UNESCO as an institution, of course, is doing many other things to work on gender equality, to work on human rights, to work on other issues where it could be relevant in different fora. So in a sense, yes, UNESCO, I retired, I'm not UNESCO anymore. UNESCO still does try to do things, but it's sort of a soft power. It's not going and telling them how you should do things.
But we advocate. One of our activities that we do with the Saga projects is advocating for the importance of implementing STI policy focused on gender equality and collecting sex disaggregated data. Regarding the implementation, as we explained, it's a project that needs to be, it's the government that has the ownership because it's time consuming, resource consuming. If they are not interested, we cannot implement it there. We cannot force to implement the project.
Down to there.
My question is, does Saga also approach the STEM, inside STEM there is a great disparity between fields, such as like faculty of mechanical is dominated by more men and it's represented by women in very less numbers. Also mathematics, in the history of mathematics, there was only one woman who was awarded field medals. So does Saga also approach this in universities?
Yes, there was one slide on horizontal segregation, but I noticed that when you presented it, you didn't explain that that's exactly what it is. It's women in the past, in many places, but not everywhere, tended to be in specific fields of science. And so economics, mathematics, computer science now are very low in women. Computer science used to have way more women in it 15, 20 years ago than it does today. And that's exactly what horizontal segregation is about. So we have questions in the questionnaires that try to pull that out.
There's a question up there. I don't think the microphone is working, so maybe everybody can speak up.
Yes.
Yeah, the light's on, but
Okay, so Andrea Hidalgo, I used to work for PICT in education unit, and a little bit further to what you said, I mean, according to my experience, now I'm no longer working for but according to my experience, the policy instruments that actually oblige kind of the member states are the conventions. Then we have declarations, which is actually, let's say, kind of a commitment, but there is no legal obligation, such as the Convention of World Heritage or even the new Adebis Convention, for example, recognition of titles. So is like there could be like, let's say, envisage like a kind of transversal work between the science sector and the education sector in order to kind of create a convention that could promote STEM among
The recommendation.
or, I don't know.
that's an interesting idea. It would have to be brought up by a member state in the governance of UNESCO.
No, I think that you're like according to like your methodology, encouraging member states little by little, this will create actually a kind of, let's say, a culture among member states on, okay, if this is working there, I will also be encouraged to work on these issues. But once you have enough, maybe, I mean, there could be a kind, I was wondering, a kind of cooperation to foresee. I know that this is a long process, very long process, but little by little, I don't know whether this could be.
Yeah,
I'll
and
let you
it's
go
it's
first.
definitely something that we can think about. But a first step, it was when we should to include gender equality into the recommendation of researchers, science and scientific researchers. So that's it's a kind of a starting point, let's say, towards that.
And from the work I did last year on ocean governance, I know how long the process is. I mean, I remember when the Rio meeting was being held in '92, and I was a grad student, and I so much wanted to go there. But it's taking ages to get anything to go through. I've worked on climate change. Climate change, policy-wise, we're where we want to be. Implementation-wise, we're not doing well. Biodiversity, another issue I worked on, we're still not there. The first tools we created internationally tended not to have teeth. And next year, there will be lots of work being done by governments to try and push that forward to make it more like climate change. Now I see the same thing happening with the oceans. There will be a second UN meeting next year on the oceans. Last night I was at a talk by Monaco, Canada, and France on ocean pollutants by plastics. That's another area where people are already putting the question out there, don't we need an international convention on this? My worry is if we have too many international conventions, they all end up being meaningless. But for gender equality in science, I think it's too narrow of a thing to get all the way through. What you'd get is a nice declaration coming out of the UN General Assembly. And we already did have the International Day for Women and Girls in Science, February 11th every year, was created only in 2015. So that was something that one member state put forward and it got approved. So. Yeah. Oh, yes.
Yeah.
In fact, gender
We
equality
work
is
with them.
being worked on in every single part of UNESCO. I worked with every single other part of UNESCO in a personal basis to try and pull everything up so we're all talking at the same level. I mentioned the project Cracking the Code. They had me as a peer reviewer looking at what they did. We had them trying to contribute to what we did. On and on it went.
Education, for
Yeah.
instance, was
Yeah, so they
done
wrote,
with
they,
input.
they did the chapter in the fourth working paper since they're the experts on that. So, ICTs, yes,
Transversal
yeah.
issue, and I know that it's very narrow, where it's like just women in science, but if you like tackle this from different perspectives, as you
Oh, yes, yes. We've done that, and there's also, UNESCO has a division of gender equality to make sure that it's mainstreamed in all the different areas of work UNESCO has. The people in that unit and the current director really loved the Saga project and gave it as much support as they could.
Yeah, thanks again. I'd like to go back to the working papers. But I was wondering about the audience of the working papers. As you mentioned, this is a holistic approach that we need to take. But who are the policymakers that you mentioned, and what is there kind of a critical size of organizations that the recommendations would be valid for? Because it seems like many actors at many different levels could help make
Yeah.
push these.
Yeah, indeed. It's something that I was mentioning a bit before. It's that we really need to have the key stakeholders on board. Who are the key stakeholders? Everything is led by this. So we need the ministry or the higher authorities in charge of STI, of Science, Technology and Innovation. Usually the Ministry of Science, Technology and Research, depending on the country. Then the Ministry of Education. We need to have on board the Ministry of Women's Affairs
If it exists.
if it exists, the Statistical Bureau, the universities, some NGOs also that are working on the topic, the civil society in general. But yes, these are all the stakeholders, all the institutions that are working towards these areas. We need to have them on board. Usually, a national committee is composed from 10 to 20 institutions. So
Large-scale institutions. I guess my question was like at a scale of a lab in a university, if you want to push some of the changes, are the recommendations relevant?
Many of them still would be. It's just that with our original mandate, UNESCO works for member states. So, but we tried to make it the tools useful to a university that wants to review. Do they have a sexual harassment policy? Do they have equal tenure track timing? If can you drop out of tenure track for child rearing and get back in and not lose those kinds of things? So the Pasteur Institute last year invited me to speak there, and they took on board a lot of this and changed policies they had. I mentioned CISA in Trieste when they were very early. They heard about it, and before we even had the data from the countries, they did it for their whole student body, just as a test to see how it worked, and they found it useful.
That in several countries there are universities.
Yeah,
on board,
national
and they're-
universities.
Yeah, national universities that are implementing the tools. So several tools can be implemented at policy level, I mean at the government level, but also at institutional one. So.
We have an online question, and then after Julie. Yeah. So the question is quite interesting, actually. So they say that the gender stereotypes could be often synchronized with the culture in the region. That's what basically people said. And the question is if we actually and how we can aim to change the mind of people in order to maintain the essence of cultural sentiments and not to destroy it, because that's what we don't want to do, but at the same time to fight against the gender bias. So basically they say how to not harm people's kind of mental, not mental, but like some sentiments which are connected to the essence of cultural sentiments.
Yeah,
I
but
hope that I understood it well. But the question
you always need to take into account the cultural part. You cannot avoid that. But what we are talking is social norms, stereotypes towards women in STEM. And it's in each country it's different, but this part also contains a personal part. And I'm trying to reply to this even with a story, let's say. Once we were organizing a round table with several women scientists around the world in the framework of, I don't know if you are aware of the International Racing Talents of the UNESCO L'Oréal Award. So we had in one round table around 40 scientists from all over the world. They were facing the same challenges. But one of them said, look, actually, I didn't have to face any challenges throughout my career. I only had to work harder. Well, you can see that that's a problem, no? And sometimes they are not even aware that they are facing some kind of barriers, and that it might be related also to the stereotypes, because it's difficult to work in an environment where the culture, but you cannot change. It's everything that it's related to the culture. It's a delicate, sensitive issue.
I think it might be useful to look at what the sub-objectives under our social norm and stereotype gender objective have to do with. Some of them, it doesn't matter so much about the local culture. It's things like make sure gender perspectives are shown in science communication and in informal and formal STEM education, including at science museums and science centers. So probably that's fairly similar everywhere. And then promoting visibility of women in STEM through things like the L'Oreal Prize or the Elsevier Prize. That will be visible everywhere. Whether people engage with it or not is up to them. But then our first one, which is overcoming non-conscious and cultural gender biases, that has to be done locally. And it does include the media, advertising, every sort of media. I remember at one point I wrote to the person in charge of Pixar because I happened to go to elementary school with that person and said, you need to have more Jessies like in Toy Story. And what did I see? Last week I saw a video by Pixar called Pearl, about the little ball of yarn who joins an all-boys club kind of financial company. And it's, if you haven't seen it, PERL, just look it up.
Oui, nous.
Est-ce que vous avez envisagé de travailler sur d'autres disciplines que les mathématiques et autres matériels disciplines techniques?
Qu'est-ce que tu réfères pour?
Et on oppose aux humanités, aux lettres et humanités. Moi, je suis géographe, je suis entre les deux. Est-ce que vous avez les moyens déjà des données là-dessus? Est-ce que vous avez tenté de regarder ça? Quelle est la place des femmes dans ces disciplines-là?
Certainly there's been a lot of interest to use the exact same approach looking at the social and human sciences. When you look at the UNESCO Institute of Statistics information that's available, it breaks out all the different kinds of education majors. And there was some data to look at, and in general we found that there were more women than men in many, if not most of the topics, except economics, which is listed in the social and human sciences, which is very strange to me that it would be there. Personally, I actually went to graduate school twice, once in the natural sciences and once in the humanities. And in the humanities, there was one boy in my class. And it was, in the science classes, it wasn't that I was the only girl, but I was usually the minority. But the truth is, I never even noticed until I was in my career. But I did notice there only being one boy in my class when I was working on Romance languages.
Let me add something on that. There is one country that, because these tools can also be in the work that Argentina is doing, they wanted to look at the social part, the human and social part, to check if there is any difference, if they can find the same pattern or different one. They didn't publish the whole report, but they are looking at that, for instance. The scissor one, yeah. On top level.
I don't know where
Yeah. Yeah, but you're referring to the vertical segregation, to the, yeah. And that you can find it in, I mean, that in the leadership positions are usually held by men. That it's true in most of the, it's not, you can see in the parliament, for instance. It's not just a matter related to science. Huh? Want to? Sorry?
You want to open the presentation?
No.
Well, I was just going to show the scissors diagram, but it doesn't. I can show her the book later.
Do you want to show it?
I had a comment. So when I heard about this the first time back in November, one of the things that really struck me is, and this is more of a comment than a question, and maybe you can address it, or you can comment further, is I think a comment that someone else made during the day was that in some places, and I think they either said Myanmar
Yes,
or Thailand,
Myanmar.
is that there were several women working as researchers, but that was because it was seen as sort of a lower a lower status job, whereas here it's much different. And I thought that, yeah, I guess I wasn't expecting to hear that day, so it really struck me. And I think when you're talking about parity or equality, there's a social aspect that differs from culture to culture, that there might be a lot of women participating in science because it's seen as a crap job, basically.
Can I add something on that? It's actually what, for instance, I don't know if you remember that we showed that in Latin America has reached parity, no? They have 45% of researchers are women. Well, because in most of the countries, the salary in research is very low. So, and women and men prefers to find other kind of jobs. So it's one of the reason why that can be at the basis of that can explain why there is why they have achieved parity, for instance. Not at the higher level, though. Huh?
Do you remember why Myanmar had such a high level of women scientists?
But in general, Myanmar, the dates that we have from Myanmar are back in 15 years old. They didn't gather any other data, and the number of researchers in general is not very high. So
if it's 85% women, but there's only 15 people in the whole country, it didn't really teach us very much.
Yeah.
So I have a question. So when you actually have these policy interventions, what is the time cycle in which you actually start seeing the impact? So when do you really judge if it has impacted positively or negatively, or it's not impacting? So when do you really start doing that?
We wish we knew. The donors really like to see the impact really soon, and evaluators like to say that impact takes 5, 10, 15 years. So it's one thing to see that the countries have a new policy. Then we have to, we're teaching them how to do the monitoring, and then we're hoping they'll do it once every 2 years, right? Am I right?
Yeah.
And we envisioned that there would always be somebody following the Saga project at UNESCO. I mean, it started with me, and I retired, and I can't just keep doing it for free forever. But we have lots of new good people, but I hope they get to stay and that they can follow and remind the countries, you want to give us your monitoring so we can see, and that way we can share that information. Eventually, I see some peer-reviewed publications coming out that show the impacts, that show the change, that then will help to create a snowball effect.
Yeah. But in general, every policy takes time to see that. I mean, yes. We, going the technical part, we advise to mainstreaming gender in all of the phases of the policy cycle. We can discuss if it should be, but in any case, to show an impact, to see the impacts of the policies in general, it takes time. So, yeah.
So, how do you see what can we do to attract more men to understand that this is a question of regarding both sex, not only women? How do you think we can attract more men to be interested in gender equality?
The first one. The first one, it's very important. We need to work, we need to change also. Before there was this part of changing the women, but now it's changing the institutions. We need to make all the institutions understanding that it's important to send men also to these conferences or to work them and do activities focused on gender equality, involving men speakers or inviting men, focusing on making them understanding that it's important. But for me, it's very important to changing social norms and stereotypes toward women in STEM, because that is something that will have an effect also on men.
Also, in institutions, at the universities, there should be some amount of training on what this means and why it is important. It can be for selfish reasons. I'm going to get more publications out there if I have a girl in my as a co-author. It could be affirmative action measures that the institution, let's say the university, will put in place, that you have to give special treatment to women until we reach equality. Then you don't need to do that anymore. I mean, they're talking about phasing out such sorts of very positive, proactive things, because we shouldn't need them. The way to not need them is for people to understand. So at UNESCO, for example, starting in 2007, everybody who worked there had to go to a course on learning about gender equality. It really changed the culture of the organization. The fact that the Director General mandated that I want there to be X numbers of all new hires be women, that sort of a thing, really, from the time I joined until the time I left, it was like night and day. When my first year at UNESCO, when we had senior management meetings in the natural sciences, I was almost always the only woman there. And by the time I left, that it was really very close to parity.
But there are other actions that are put in place by, for instance, the European Union in the Horizon 2020. One of the things to present a project, it's important, to have a gender balance in the team. Or the Irish Research Council, they only fund researchers that they consider excellent, and those that are to be considered excellent are those researchers that, when sex or gender it's important to research, they take into account in the research itself, but also in the number, in the component, in the team itself. So those are always, when it's a matter of funding, so maybe you can have an impact faster, let's say.
Yeah, so I think.
I have so about the policies that try to incentivize women for civic knowledge, well, science and other fields. can it be that favoring or facilitating the wage of women can actually damage the, or I don't know, aggravate the stereotype against women? Do you understand?
Yeah, but the kind of actions that we are not pushing, but we are suggesting to countries are like taking gender bias into consideration, harassment. I mean, we don't think that those are again can be used somehow against, other kind of instruments are really you need in each policy to take gender equality into consideration more than just put in place your measure to favorite women. So it's a matter of formulating policies and including gender equality also. If you want.
Like the same as affirmative action, where someone might be assumed to have only gotten their position because of an affirmative action policy and not based on merit. So it might be automatically assumed that you only were accepted because you're a woman,
But
not because you're good at what you do.
That's, for instance, the criticism that got the quotas thing. Yeah, but it's not one of the things that we usually on the quotas.
I think we've sort of, at least I'm from the United States, I think we've grown beyond that. We've learned it was definitely necessary at a certain point, but when you get to a certain level of numbers of women in science, then you don't need to do that anymore, because then the change self-perpetuates, because there are women inside in the management who can advocate for going forward. So it's getting the first 10% in is the hardest. And I also wanted to make the point that if you go to the website that Ali showed for where all the policies are listed under the Global Observatory of STI policy instruments, a country can see what a comparator country has already done. They can say, our income level is this, our development level is this, and our population is this. What country in this database is kind of similar to us that we could look at as a model, what worked for them, and try it? So that's one reason that exists. And so countries that have already done this, they've probably changed their policies after a generation. So another country would be taking advantage of the mistakes that were already fixed.
I want to add something on what we were discussing before. It's not just a number of for the quotas, etc. It's not just a matter of numbers. It's a matter of equality. It's a matter of having the same rights. So that's why I cannot say I'm against quotas, but I don't think that having the 30% will solve the problem. For instance, we need to create the possibility. We need to create the environment.
Well, I don't follow politics and government that closely, but I can certainly say that we have seen literature that if there are women in government at the highest positions, that encourages girls in school to think that, yes, I can do that too. And it actually even translates into help for science. There was a province in India, but I can't remember exactly where, a study I read several years ago, The girls there, when there was a woman at the head of the government, they wanted to study everything in school more, and it led to more girls studying STEM as well. And it also made their parents think, in the past they might have said, oh, you don't even need to go to school, we need you to work on the farm. But now they could see that if you go to school, you're going to be able to earn money and you'll be able to help us in our old age that way instead. So there are positive benefits, even if it doesn't have a trickle-down level effect to other levels of government. Within UNESCO, having the first ever women director general really made a change. Now we're on our second woman director general, who is French, who was the Minister for Culture under Hollande. So do you have anything to add if you know things I don't know?
No.
about the world?
I mean, I think that it's not just a matter of one leader. It's not that if you have, even if it's the right leader can have a big influence, it's really the system that needs to be changed.
The example of Angela Merkel was just a model of what would be
Maybe we can actually switch to kind of more informal discussions. I think it will be easier because already so many people, indeed, they probably need to leave. But I wanted to thank you all for attending this event. For us, actually, it was very surprising that we got so much feedback, and we wanted to thank particularly also people who came, our guests. I mean, thank you very much. Come again, and of course Dule and all the people from Cree, like Lean, Alvin, they went away, Emma, who were really engaging, Ayar, Anshu, who prepared this amazing video, the people from 500 Women Scientists, and all those people who came, and we don't know yet your names, but so if you have some questions, please come and again to discuss. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. This, did you take the...
Yeah.